editor of Politics First, which is one of the major political magazines. He's also a celebrity in his own right. Those of you that watch RT will see him interviewed there almost daily. So I'd like to thank him for agreeing to chair our seminar, but also to thank him for the support he's shown Lobby for Cyprus over the years through his magazine. Thank you. Okay, so some of you have already seen these slides, so I apologize, but let's just go through this quickly. So we all know that the next referendum on a settlement to end the Turkish occupation of Cyprus will be crucial to Cyprus. And so at Lobby for Cyprus, we thought, what can we do other than everything that we're already doing? And we looked back to 2004 and the Annan Plan, and we realized something that very few people actually realize, which is that in 2004, the refugees of the diaspora did not have a right to vote. And so that got us thinking, and we started doing our research across the world to see what happens in referendums generally. And so that's the background to our campaign. And our question is, why should we of the diaspora be excluded? If we go back to 74, the reality is not, in fact, very complex. You know, when you speak to outsiders, as soon as you mention Cyprus, then they say, oh, that's a very complicated situation. It's quite simple. Turkey invaded, they raped, they murdered, they intimidated. The Greek Cypriots did not leave voluntarily, they fled for their lives. And ever since, they have been denied access to their lands and to their homes by the occupying Turkish military forces. So really the only true complication when it comes to Cyprus is Turkey and the unwillingness of particular foreign governments to deal with Turkey as they should. So legal terminology, what happened to the refugees and the internally displaced people of 74 is known as forced displacement. Forced displacement in turn is classified as ethnic cleansing under the Rome Statute and is in fact an international war crime. So Turkey paints a pretty picture. Turkey paints a picture of the Greek Cypriots living happily ever after, that they left voluntarily and that they live in a prosperous Cyprus with all the mod cons that they would like and so forth. The reality is not that. The reality is, for those of you who have visited any of the refugee settlements within Cyprus, that they live in homes that were designed and set up for temporary shelter. 42 years later, they're living in these cramped conditions. And in fact, the resilience of the Greek Cypriots is used against them, when in fact it shouldn't. So in 2004, we've already talked about the Annan Plan. The refugees were in fact forgotten. Who got to vote on behalf of the Republic of Cyprus? As we said, only those that were already registered to vote. So in other words, those who satisfy the 6-month criteria for residency, which we'll return to. On the other hand, who voted on the Turkish side for the Turkish Cypriots? Of course, the colonists voted. What's their interest in all this? Is it in their interest to leave? No. Is that, what interest do they have in the occupied areas? But yet Turkey extended the right to vote to those colonists who in fact are Turkey's tools of ethnic cleansing. So, what of the refugees? So given the length of time that has passed since the occupation, so 42 years, in all likelihood most of the refugees would have by now lost their right to vote if they ever had it. And those who have then had children, their children are unlikely to actually have or possess the right to vote. So as Nick said, why should they not have a right to decide the fate and the future of their lands? In fact, they didn't have a say when they first left. So contrary, if those of you who know, when you apply to the Immovable Property Commission of Turkey, you sign a declaration that you voluntarily left, because that's what Turkey wants everyone to believe, that the Greek Cypriots just decided to leave. They weren't forced out. They didn't leave they left of their own free will. So that's not the reality. The argument in favor of them voting is because this settlement will decide whether they're permanently displaced or whether they get to go back. And that's a critical issue for them. So they had no control the first time when they lost their homes. They had no control over what's been negotiated by the politicians, and they had no say in the Annan plan on what happens. So effectively, they've had no voice to date. But our campaign doesn't stop at the refugees. When we look at extending the eligibility to vote in Cyprus, one thing we have to point out is that our focus is on the Greek Cypriot election rights. And I put Greek Cypriots in brackets because when we talk of Greek Cypriots and elections, we don't only mean Greek Cypriots, we also mean the Armenians, the Maronites, and the Latin Cypriots and all other minorities in Cyprus. Because under the 1960 constitution, you have two electoral rolls. You have the Greek Cypriot electoral roll and the Turkish Cypriot electoral roll. So when we talk of Greek Cypriot rights, we extend it to everyone who falls within that electoral rights. That was important to clarify. So on eligibility to vote, we go beyond the original victims of displacement, and we would propose that the right to vote is extended to all those who either hold citizenship of the Republic of Cyprus or who are eligible to apply for citizenship. Eligibility, some may say, well, why don't they go and get it? Well, in reality, if you're eligible to be a Cypriot citizen, the whole procedure, the bureaucratic process of obtaining it is just that, it's bureaucratic. You still hold the right. So that's why we would extend it to those who don't actually hold citizenship but would be eligible. But the important key is here that we would not include a residency requirement. The obvious reason is, who has in these modern days the time to pause their life for 6 months, move to Cyprus and live there for 6 months in order to obtain the right to vote? Very few people. So in effect, that residency requirement acts as an obstacle and a bar to people obtaining the right to vote, even if they already hold Cypriot citizenship. So why all Cypriots? Obviously, when we say all Cypriots, there have been objections raised from the community and from the political quarters. So arguments that people say to us is like, well, if we extend the right to Cypriots of the diaspora, then Turkey will also extend the right to Turkish Cypriots of the diaspora too. In response to that, we have no issue. In fact, we would welcome the Turkish Cypriots of the diaspora voting, and we would prefer that they vote instead of the colonists, the Turkish colonists who are located in the occupied areas of Cyprus. The second objection, if we expand the pool of eligible voters, then Turkey will also do the same. Well, this is what I call a reality check. When have we or anyone else ever had control over what Turkey actually does? Turkey will do whatever it wants to do, whether we do it or not. So depriving our own citizens of a right, just because Turkey might use it as an excuse to expand their control, is, in my understanding, not a valid point. So then the other questions we get is, well, why should those who don't live in Cyprus interfere with Cyprus, and why should they have a say? So in other words, why should anyone in the diaspora vote, or overseas? And why should those who have not lost their villages have a vote? I mean, I personally have been involved with Lobby for Cyprus since 1999. I'm not a refugee. Theo, who is our coordinator, has been involved with Lobby from Cyprus from the start. He also is not a refugee. I would say that quite a few people in this audience are not refugees. Yet that doesn't stop us from feeling the connection to Cyprus and from campaigning for justice in Cyprus. And this is what I term enfranchisement. So basically, the fact that we're non-resident to Cyprus doesn't mean that we've lost our connection to Cyprus. The fact, and this has been acknowledged by government, and they've not only acknowledged, but also they've benefited from it. Whenever they come to London, or whenever they go to America or Canada, or wherever it is that they find Greek separate communities, they benefit from the fact. You know, we host them, we facilitate their visits, we get them meetings with people. I mean, so the acknowledgement is there that we have not lost our connection to Cyprus, because if we had, they would have nothing to come to. So not allowing us to vote, in effect, will disenfranchise us. So through the decades, we have assisted in shaping Cyprus. So whether it is through politics or whether it's the economic crisis. I mean, when the economic crisis hit Cyprus, there were a lot of movements and initiatives and activities that we in the diaspora run to assist Cyprus. When there's, so we do a lot from external. The fact that we're not residents doesn't really affect us in any way. And then something that I will return to is that the global trends across the world that we identified when we did our research are actually pointing us towards this expanded scope of eligibility. So quickly back to the law. The law of the Republic of Cyprus, can we pass a specific law which will determine who votes in a referendum? Yes. Another objection that we hear from the politicians is that it's too hard, we'll need to amend our constitution. That's not true. Not only have I done my research, but I've also consulted with constitutional experts and professors in Cyprus, and they have confirmed time and time again that no constitutional amendment is required in order to extend the right to vote to those in the diaspora for a referendum. So there's a third objection dealt with. So what can we do? Well, there is a general law on referendums in Cyprus, so we could in effect amend this piece of legislation, but if we amend this piece of legislation, it means that it won't only apply to the referendum on the Cyprus settlement, but it will apply to all referendums. The other option is what happened in 2004. So 2004, we had the adoption of a special law, which in effect changed the voting time. So expanded the time that was allowed for voting to occur. So this is the proposal that Lobby is putting forward, which is to adopt a special law which would extend the eligibility of voters on the referendums on a settlement to end the occupation. The aim of this would be to secure the right of citizens in diaspora to vote in a referendum. It is limited in scope, as we said. It does not apply to general elections or local mayor elections. It solely applies to the referendum on ending the occupation, the Turkish occupation. So we assume that this would be easier to garner support if we show them that we don't want to interfere in their internal affairs. What we want to have a say in is what happens to Cyprus in the future. And that's something that's really important because a referendum of this magnitude has a permanent effect on Cyprus. It's not like a general election where you can change the result in 4 years' time. Something happened, we didn't like the result, you can change it in 4 years' time. A referendum on assessment to end the occupation will have a permanent effect on Cyprus. So what we're asking to vote for is of great significance. So the global trends that I've indicated, so how's it done before? Is there precedence for having overseas elections? Of course. Mr. Gugulari, this has just run overseas elections for the parliamentary. So yes, elections do happen and are offered to those living overseas. But has it happened in terms of eliminating the residency requirement? And again, yes. So since the beginning of the millennium, which is when the South Sudan referendum occurred, residency is no longer really a criteria in deciding whether someone should vote or not. So we've seen it in South Sudan and East Timor in referendums, we've seen it in Iraq and Afghanistan for elections, and we'll soon be seeing it in the UK. So in South Sudan, this is the piece of legislation, you don't have to read it, I won't bore you with it. The key point here is that for a voter to be eligible, there was no mandatory requirement for them to have been resident at any point. They could attach their eligibility to ancestral links alone. If we turn to the Iraq elections of 2005, again, there is no reference to residency. And here is when we start seeing that entitlement to citizenship is enough. So those Iraqis who voted in 2004 did not need to hold a passport or an identity card. They just needed to show that they were eligible for that citizenship. So the global trends are clear. I mean, we're not asking for something that Lobby decided overnight to make up. I mean, what we've decided and what we're proposing is grounded in law, it's grounded in other referendum that have occurred across the world. So then the UK overseas election, some of you would have seen the news that those who have been abroad for more than 15 years will not be entitled to vote in an EU referendum. This caused outrage, and there were a number of petitions to Parliament calling for a change in the law. Important here for us is that the UK government acknowledged that it was no longer appropriate in these days of globalization and free movement and travel to put a limit on when someone loses their eligibility to vote. So the Overseas Election Bill, which will be tabled to Parliament, will have the effect of scrapping the time limit. So no matter how long you live abroad, you will have a right to vote in all UK elections. What you would have seen in the news today is something separate, which is the legal challenge that was brought by two individuals because they say that their inability to vote in the EU referendum would affect their free movement under the EU. I mean, that challenge continues. It was lost in the Supreme Court, but in all likelihood it will be taken to the European Court of Human Rights. But what's important for us is not the loss of the case, but the fact that the government itself, as you can see in response to the petition, said it will be changing the law and it will be scrapping the time limit. So even in the UK, residency will no longer be a criteria for the right to vote in any elections. So some people will say, well, what about logistics? It's so complicated, it's too hard. How are we going to register all these unknown people and how are we going to organize the votes and so forth? If we take South Sudan, and this is taken from the Carter Center who observed the South Sudan elections, there were 8 out-of-country locations where people could vote in addition to Sudan. There were 41 registration stations where people could go and register to vote, and there were 188 voting stations across the 8 different locations. There was no difficulty. If we want it to happen, it can happen. The South Sudan East Timor was sponsored by the UN bodies that were responsible for them. There is facilities to help this happen. So logistics is another reason why people object to it, that it's all too hard. In reality, it's not too hard. It's quite simple. So what are the next steps? Well, we need to change the law. We've had the idea, we need to get it tabled. We need a proposal drafted, we need the minister to either propose it or a private bill of a member of Parliament. It would then be vetted by the House of Committees, and then the House of Representatives would vote, and then we get to vote. Simple, except we need to get the government or MP to table the legislation. So our future, it is a political decision. So despite the fact that I have spoken about the law, the reality is that it's not the law that will help us in this situation. Elections are still very much in the political sphere and require the political will to extend the right to vote. And so that's why we need to start lobbying. We need to start lobbying internally in Cyprus to get a movement behind allowing us in the diaspora to vote. And it's not them doing us any favor to grant us the right to vote. It's just a matter of justice, and it's what is acceptable across the world. So what can you do? You can also, in addition to lobbying, you can sign the petition, which I'm sure you've all signed, but you can get everyone else to sign our petition, which is written to the President, Mr. Anastasiades, and you should have flyers on your chairs about the petition. That's all I'm going to talk about for now, and I'll happily take any questions that you have after, when Marcus, the chair, tells me I can take questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Theodora, for what was a very compelling and thorough analysis, and it was put forward in a very heartfelt manner, so thank you very much for that. Okay, so that concludes the contributions from the panel members. I'm now going to give the floor to representatives from the refugee associations. The first representative will be Dr. Βασίλης Μαύρου of the Famagusta Association.
On behalf of the associations that are involved in this campaign, we would like to thank Theodora and Lobby for Cyprus for organizing this event. Cyprus is one of the 6 European Union member states which deprives its nationals resident abroad of the rights to vote to national parliamentary and presidential elections. This rule could amount to infringement of their freedom of movement and residence under European Union laws. There is no doubt that this is a gross violation of European Union citizenship rights. It discourages citizens to move to another member state and can be seen as a violation of freedom of movement and residence of European Union residents. Unfortunately, Cyprus violates Article 3 of the first protocol of the European Convention of Human Rights for the right to regular, free and fair elections. The fact that the relevant legislation in Cyprus states that there is no need to be habitually resident in Cyprus to be eligible to stand up for elections comes in contrast with the 6 months habitual residency requirement needed for eligibility to vote in the island. This is totally different to the view that many other European Union states take, where they reserve seats in their national parliament for the representatives of their expatriate citizens. These countries are, for example, Italy, Portugal, France, Croatia, and for the Senate House, France and Italy, most of them voting electronically or by postal vote. Since 1974, a very high percentage of Cypriot refugees were forcibly thrown out of their homes and property and had no other choice but to leave Cyprus and migrate. There is therefore no doubt that the relevant legislation on excluding all categories of Cypriots that live abroad is discriminatory and totally unfair. What we are asking is for the Cypriot government and the parliament to correct this unjust situation. The starting point is to allow the displaced refugees of diaspora to vote when the time comes for a possible referendum for a solution to the Cyprus problem. It is unacceptable and at the same time unthinkable to exclude a great part of the refugees from Cyprus, forced out from their land and temporarily migrated in a referendum for a solution to the Cyprus problem. It is very well known fact that the argument that once this right is reinstated to Greek Cypriots, then a great part of Turkish Cypriots will receive the same rights of voting, it doesn't stand. This is because nearly all Turkish Cypriots are registered voters in Cyprus and are already benefited from other services in the island. Paradoxically, Turkish and Kurdish settlers in the occupied part of Cyprus have also been registered as voters and showed their presence at the 2004 unplanned referendum. It is therefore absolutely discriminatory and unjust not to allow at least the refugees forced to live abroad to be able to vote in such a referendum. There is no doubt in our minds that the Cypriot state downgrades and dismisses this group of refugees. In Greek we say τους ξεγράψαμε. One of the most important one of the most important connections of Cyprus is the fact that the Cypriots of diaspora, refugees or not, stood by the side of Cyprus at all times, especially at difficult political, social, and economic difficulties. In 1974 and before, we need to stress here that the Cypriots of diaspora were the ones that created the so-called economic miracle in Cyprus, to materialize through injecting to Cyprus a huge financial assistance and investments. There is no doubt that this campaign will be at the end successful, provided the right support and solidarity is offered to us by the rest of the community and indeed by Cypriots and specifically refugees that live in other countries. The collection of thousands of signatures supporting our views could probably make it possible for a switch of the Cyprus state policy. The refugees of diaspora should be able to have the right of voting at Cyprus, not only at possible referendum, but at national parliamentary and presidential elections. This forum has done a lot of groundwork in relation to canvassing, between others, political leaders in Cyprus and who showed an understanding and readiness to support our cause. It is about time that Cyprus has to reinstate the violated human rights of the Cypriot refugees of diaspora, who were forced to abandon their property and land in Cyprus in order to save their lives. We call upon the government of Cyprus and the President of the Republic of Cyprus to initiate and implement legislation for the voting rights of Cypriot refugees abroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you don't mind me doing it from here because I'm going to have difficulty walking up there. My name's Nick Yanley of the Eptagomi Association UK. Now, Eptagomi is a village in the Karpasia region of Cyprus. It has approximately 3,000 inhabitants who now live abroad. At the time of the invasion, there was approximately 900 living there. I know I said 3,000, but even then, many of them had left to find their wealth abroad. Now, at those 900 who were all forcibly displaced in 74, 250 remained behind under Turkish occupation for 2 years. Out of those 250, 17 went missing. Out of the 17, 9 were found in mass graves, or discovered in mass graves over the last 10 years, and obviously repatriated to their families. Now, many of these families, including the missing and the ones who have been found, live here in the UK. They're not residents in Cyprus anymore. Now, is there anyone here who can put their hand on the heart and say they've not made the ultimate sacrifice for Cyprus? Is there anyone here who can say, why shouldn't they vote and what happens to their land in the occupied areas? No one. I want to ask you one question. In fact, I will ask the whole audience one question. Show of hands, how many in this room are eligible to do their national service? And how many of you have got children and grandchildren that are eligible to do national service if they go to Cyprus? Show of hands. So the point I'm trying to make is we're eligible to give our lives for Cyprus, and I'm more than willing to do that, but we're not eligible to vote on what happens to our properties. So on that point, I'd like to thank you all and hand back to Marcos.
Θα παρακαλούσα να μου επιτρέψετε να μιλήσω στα ελληνικά, γιατί είμαι δάσκαλος της ελληνικής γλώσσας εδώ για πολλά χρόνια και επειδή βλέπω μπροστά μου Έλληνες μόνο. Λοιπόν, είμαστε μπροστά σε ένα δίλημμα κατά κάποιους, κατά πόσον, αν δοθεί το δικαίωμα να ψηφίσουμε στο ρεφερέντουμ που ελπίζουμε να έρθει και εύχομαι να μην βάζουμε την άμαξα μπροστά από τα άλογα, γιατί ακόμα δεν είδαμε τη λύση και προσωπικά τουλάχιστον έχω και τρομερές επιφυλάξεις αν θα φτάσουμε ποτέ εκεί. Παρόλο τούτον όμως, καλά είναι να ξέρουμε εκ των προτέρων τα δικαιώματα μας. Πρώτα απ' όλα, θεωρώ ότι είναι μεγάλη αδικία για πρόσφυγες Κύπριους που αναγκάστηκαν να εγκαταλείψουν με τη βία των όπλων των Τούρκων εισβολέων τα σπίτια και τις περιουσίες τους και να καταφύγουν είτε στην ελεύθερη Νότια Κύπρο, αν με επιτραπεί να πω, είτε στο εξωτερικό, να μην έχουν το δικαίωμα να ψηφίσουν. Αυτό είναι, κατά τη γνώμη μου, απαράδεκτο. Πολύ περισσότερο, γιατί τα γεγονότα του 1974 τα έζησαν, άλλοι με την επιστράτευση πολέμησαν, έχασαν συναδέλφους, συγγενείς, φίλους, γνωστούς, έχουν αγνοωμένους και άλλοι, τα γυναικόπαιδα, δέχτηκαν όλη εκείνη τη φρίκη του πολέμου και τις δοκιμασίες που είναι ανεξίτηλες. Εάν απαγορευτεί το δικαίωμα σε αυτούς τους ανθρώπους να ψηφίσουν για την τύχη του τόπου τους, για τα χωριά τους, για τις περιουσίες τους κλπ., είναι σαν να τους ξεγράφουν πραγματικά, για να χρησιμοποιήσω την ίδια λέξη που χρησιμοποιήθηκε προηγουμένως. Κάτι που πικραίνει και που θα κάνει πολύ κόσμο, απόδειμο δικό μας κόσμο, να νιώθει πολύ άβολα και ίσως να τους αναγκάσουν να αλλάξουν και στάση έναντι της ιδιαίτερης πατρίδας μας. Πράγμα που απέφχομαι φυσικά. Επειδή όμως ακούστηκε εδώ για οικονομικό θαύμα, όντως οι απόδημοι έδωσαν τη μερίδα του λέοντος σε ό,τι αφορά την οικονομική συνδρομή των συμπατριωτών μας για να σταθεί στα πόδια της η Κύπρος το 1974. Και όχι μόνο. Δεν θα αναφερθώ σε άλλες περιόδους. Προσωπικά, ίσως θα ήμουν ο τελευταίος που έπρεπε να μιλώ για αυτό το δικαίωμα, γιατί το έχω και πρέπει να το πω για να μην παρεξηγούμε. Εγώ ήρθα εδώ με απόσπαση από το Υπουργείο Παιδείας και έχω το δικαίωμα να ψηφίζω. Όμως, επειδή στο σύνδεσμο μας συζητήθηκε το θέμα και πάρα πολλοί συνάδελφοι, μέλη του συνδέσμου, είναι εδώ χωρίς να έχουν αυτό το δικαίωμα, μιλώ περισσότερο εκ μέρους τους. Και το διασαφηνίζω για να μην παρεξηγηθώ. Και νιώθουν πάρα πολύ έντονα ότι καμιά δύναμη δεν μπορεί να τους εμποδίσει να έχουν το δικαίωμα να ψηφίσουν για τις περιουσίες τους και για την επιστροφή τους. Διότι, αν και απόδημοι, όλοι μας εμείς νοσταλγούμε να γυρίσουμε πίσω. Και θα γυρίσουμε πίσω αν υπάρξει λύση. Αν δεν έχουμε το δικαίωμα να ψηφίσουμε, μπορεί να καθοριστεί η τύχη μας από κάποιους άλλους που δεν είναι καν πρόσφυγες ίσως. Σαν πρόσφυγες δηλαδή νιώθουμε πολύ πιο έντονα από τους άλλους απόδημους ότι πρέπει να έχουμε αυτό το δικαίωμα. Προχωρώ όμως και λέω ότι ούτε και οι άλλοι Κύπροι απόδημοι πρέπει να στερηθούν του δικαιώματος αυτού, γιατί είναι προσδεδεμένοι στην Κύπρο για όλη τους τη ζωή. Και είναι οργανωμένοι στην αποδημία, σε συνδέσμους και σε συλλόγους και σε σωματεία και σε οργανώσεις, που πρώτον τους μέλημα, τουλάχιστον μέχρι την επίλυση του Κυπριακού, ήταν και εξακολουθεί να είναι η συνδρομή τους, η βοήθεια τους, ηλικοί και άλλοι, στην Κύπρο. Και αυτό αναγνωρίζεται από την Κυπριακή πολιτεία. Μας το λένε κάθε φορά που έρχονται εδώ επίσημοι κρατικοί αξιωματούχοι, πολιτικοί αρχηγοί κλπ. Θα ήταν οξύμορο λοιπόν, από τη μια να αναγνωρίζουμε την προσφορά αυτών των ανθρώπων, των αποδήμων, στον τόπο και από την άλλη να τους κλείνουμε την πόρτα. Θα ήταν δε τρομερή αδικία, επαναλαμβάνω και τελειώνω, εάν το δικαίωμα αυτό στερηθεί και από τους πρόσφυγες απόδημους του 1974. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you for that, Sávas. I had a very, very competent translator for that, and I hear that there were references made to the military and to the economic situation, which of course are very important. Next up, can I invite Sula Kitsu of the Morphu Refugee Association.
I'm going to speak as a refugee from Morphu. I just need to speak to you as a human being who wants to exercise their right to vote if there is a referendum about the solution of the Cyprus problem. I come from Morphu, which is a very beautiful area, as you may know. It was an affluent area and it was a very happy environment. And I do remember when we fled in 1974, I was a teenager and I fled with my family. And I do remember how much the family was completely in despair. We were running for our lives. We didn't know where to go. Our family came from Lapithos. That was the first influx of refugees. And we welcomed the people from Lapithos in our house, but we never ever realized we were also going to be forced to leave our homes. And for 5 years, I had no memory, not much memory of what happened, because I think at the back of my mind, I wanted to maybe not remember these traumatic times. When we came to London, we were welcomed by some family, and unfortunately my father, who was the pillar of the family, became ill and he died. So we took him back to Cyprus to bury him. We buried him in Limassol, and we promised to him that we will take him back to Morpho. When I visited Cyprus after the borders, so-called borders, were opened, I remember I went to Morpho, and again, it was just like being in a movie. It wasn't as if it was happening to me. And what I did, I took a soil from Morpho, and I took it to my father's grave as a token of my promise that one day we will take him back. And the same promise was given to the rest of the family members who died, like uncles and grandfather and grandmothers and so forth. And I'm never, ever going to let go of that promise. When I visited Morpho, I took my daughter to see Morpho, and I knew Morpho as an affluent, vibrant town. What we saw was quite the opposite. So to be honest, my daughter was disappointed. And in fact, she said to me, "Is this what you're crying for?" So I had to explain, I had to take her around and say, okay, this is my home. My home is not the same as it used to be. My family is not around. You should have been born here, I said to her, but you were born in London instead. You should have been here. And I did explain that the house, as bricks and mortars, one day will fall. And this is what our children need to remember, that the affection and the connection we have with a home, i.e. a house, has to change. We have to look at the area as a whole, not just as our home, because the house will fall one day. But what I said to my daughter, I said, forget the house, okay? It's been neglected, it's not the same. Just look around you. So I took her around the area of Morpho. We went up to Lapithos, we went up to Xeros, we went everywhere, and I said, all this land, which is miles and miles and miles, it's ours. Do you think this is fair, what has happened? And she says, Mom, now I understand what you mean, and I understand why you're so passionate about not just Morpho, but the Cyprus that is occupied. When we came to London, we tried to make a life for ourselves. We did our best. We went to universities, colleges, we got jobs, we had family, we had children. This has happened in my lifetime and in my children's lifetime. So I think that the refugees and their children and all the people who come from the displaced area should be allowed to vote, because it is, I don't need to tell you, it's so unfair that a settler or a colonist, whatever we want to call them, that were imported from Turkey have the right to vote, and not myself and not my children. That's what I cannot understand, and this is what I will never accept. I don't think I can add anything else. I want to extend my appreciation to people that are not refugees For example, like Theo, like Theodora, and all the other people. I'm sorry if I don't name all of you, because they work, and Christos over here, and all the other people, they work relentlessly, and they work much harder than I do, who am a refugee, for a justice solution to the Cyprus problem. And I know these people are very passionate and very correct, and they do it because they believe in it. They do not do it because they will gain anything out of it. And I wholeheartedly support that these people, who are not refugees, should be allowed to vote in the event of a referendum, because these are the people who make our community in England, and these are the people who have worked so hard, much harder than me, for a just solution to the Cyprus problem. Thank you.
Well, Sula, for a first public speech, that was excellent and very, very emotional, so thank you for that. Last but no means least, we have Angelos Bashongas, the representative of the Ios Ambrosios Refugee Association.
Εγώ δεν θα βρω δικαιολογία για την κρεβάτα, αν έχω τσακιώσει την operation, έτσι, αν η φωνή μου έχει λίγο πρόβλημα, πρέπει να με συγχωρήσετε. Okay. Ούτε εγώ ήμουν προετοιμασμένος για μεγάλη ομιλία, αλλά ο πατέρας μου ήταν καθηγητής στην Αγγλική Σχολή στην Κύπρο και πάντα μου έλεγε όταν βρεθείς κάπου και έχεις κάποιο πρόβλημα, δεν ξέρεις τι πεις, να τους πεις μια ιστορία. Και έτσι εγώ θα σας πω την ιστορία μου πώς ήρθα εδώ στο Λονδίνο, τις περιστάσεις στην εισβολή. I don't know, should I say it in English or in Greek? I'm not quite sure. I'll say it in English. Anyway, I started from Maiu Ambrosios. I was engaged. The first invasion, I'm going to keep it short. First invasion ran for our lives and ended up in Famagusta with my fiancée, where we had a flat there. And there comes the second invasion eventually, and everybody's running for their lives. And that's where I wanted to have one or two of the British MPs here today to listen to this. I know we have a chairman from Famagusta Association here. One of the biggest crimes that happened in Cyprus in the war, in the invasion in Cyprus, was when the British lorries from the bases came around just before the Turks bombed all the hotels along the line in Famagusta. They came round. Everybody was anything else but Greek Cypriot was allowed to get onto those lorries, and they took them to the bases, and from there they brought them over to England. It was like another Schindler's List, if you like to put it that way, but with the different candidates. Anybody that was Greek Cypriot was not allowed to get on the buses. I tried to get on with my wife, my fiancée. When they realized I had a Cypriot passport, you're out. I had to stay there. The last two bombs in Famagusta, it came on the Othello Court, the hotel that was next to it. I was there. I got injured. I lost my memory for 3 weeks. I ended up in Limassol, and then somehow somebody recognized me and sent me to my parents. That was in short what happened. Eventually I got my memory back. I came back to England. I got married and I have 2 lovely kids. However, recently with this referendum, it's brought things back to me. The pain and what we've been through all these years, you know. And like everybody else said, it's very unjust that we are the people that have lost everything in Cyprus, 42 years in this country. You know, we work, and I have to say, I don't know many of the people that voted last week in the elections that they have the so-called documents that they need to vote in the Cypriot elections. If any of them, even if 10% of them had proper documents to vote, everybody got their documents from one of their parties, the 2 big parties, or the others. We have been approached in the past, but I never accepted. And that is one of the things that's wrong. Wrong in Cyprus, and they should look into it, and they should take these papers away from everybody. They should not be allowed to vote whilst we the proper people from Cyprus, the refugees, they're going to vote about their own property, about their land. We lost 42 years, and nobody is considering to give us a vote. The last few weeks, the last few months, with the Lobby for Cyprus, we've had contacts with the leaders of the presidential, of the political parties in Cyprus, with the Omospondia, the federation here, some people from the federation, few people from the political leaders in this country. I know we have one here today, but I have not seen any of them stand behind us. And as you all know, Lobby for Cyprus is a non-political organization. We're not looking for anything. But I would have loved to see some of these political leaders from London to join us and support us for our right to be able to vote for our property, for our land, for being refugees for 42 years. There is no response from everybody. They're all hiding behind their little finger. Where are they today? Can you see? Apart from the gentleman there, do you see anybody else? No. And I have to say one more thing before I finish. I know we went to see the High Commissioner recently, and trust me, he made us very welcome and very fair to us. We made our claim. He wrote to the President, and obviously we had a reply, which was straight no. And he also indicated that he wants the embassy to be the home of every Cypriot in London. I want to tell him that it's a temporary home for every Cypriot refugee in London. The same way he went on the social media last week and asked people to vote for the referendum, for every Cypriot to vote in the referendum that's coming up in a month's time. The same way I want him to get on the social media and say, Angelos Pishonges should be able to vote in the referendum that has to do with his land. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure we'd all agree that Angelos's life story fully encapsulates the tragedy which befell Cyprus in 1974, and a tragedy which is still plaguing it to this very day. We're now moving into the last part of tonight's seminar, which is of course the question and answer session.
Προς το Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο του Lobby for Cyprus, Λονδίνο, είναι από την Αδούλωτην Κερίνιαν Προσφυγικό Σωματείο. Συμπατριώτες και συμπατριώτισσες. Τίτλος «Δικαίωμα ψήφου σε δημοψήφισμα για λύση του κυπριακού προβλήματος σε Κύπριους πολίτες οι οποίοι ζουν στο εξωτερικό». Αντιλαμβανόμαστε ότι απόψε συζητάτε την έγκριση ψηφίσματος προς τον Πρόεδρο της Δημοκρατίας, με το οποίο να ζητάτε να δοθεί το δικαίωμα σε Κύπριους του εξωτερικού να ψηφίσουν σε δημοψήφισμα στην περίπτωση λύσης του Κυπριακού. Πρόκειται για ένα πολύ σοβαρό θέμα, το οποίο μπορεί να έχει κόστος για την Κύπρο από κινήσεις αντιπερισπασμού εκ μέρους των Τούρκων. Διαβάζοντας το προτινόμενο ψήφισμα, πιστεύω ότι η τυχόν έγκρισή του ως έχει εμπεριέχει τον κίνδυνο που έχω αναφέρει πιο πάνω. Επίσης, το θέμα αποδήμων γενικά είναι σοβαρό θέμα, το οποίο χρήζει σοβαρών μελετών από τους ειδικούς. Η ισχυρή άποψη του Σωματείου μας σε αυτό το θέμα είναι ότι μια τέτοια πρωτοβουλία θα πρέπει να περιοριστεί αυστηρά στο εξής αίτημα. Να δοθεί δικαίωμα ψήφου στους Κύπριους πολίτες, οι οποίοι κατάγονται από τις κατεχόμενες περιοχές της Κύπρου και οι οποίοι το 1974 εκδιώχθηκαν βίαια από τα σπίτια τους, από τους Τούρκους κατακτητές, εκτοπίστηκαν στις ελεύθερες περιοχές της Κύπρου και από εκεί αναγκάστηκαν να ξενιτευτούν ως πρόσφυγες πλέον θύματα του πολέμου για να ζήσουν και μάλιστα έφυγαν από τα νόμιμα λιμάνια και αεροδρόμια υπό τον έλεγχο της Κυπριακής κυβέρνησης. Σε αυτούς πρέπει να περιληφθούν και οι απόγονοί τους, καθώς και μέλη των ιδίων οικογενειών, οι οποίοι το 1974, τις ημέρες της εισβολής, ευρίσκοντος στο εξωτερικό είτε για σπουδές, είτε για διακοπές, είτε για θέματα υγείας. Ακόμη μπορούν να περιληφθούν και κάποια μέλη των ιδίων οικογενειών, οι οποίοι μπορούν να είχαν πάει στο εξωτερικό κάποιο χρονικό διάστημα πριν την εισβολή για να εργαστούν. Η πρόνοια να έφυγαν από τα νόμιμα λιμάνια το 1974 ή αμέσως μετά θα αποκλείσει η απόπειρα της Τουρκίας να δοθεί ψήφος και σε Τούρκους, οι οποίοι μετανάστευσαν μετά το 1974 από τα κατεχόμενα μέσω Τουρκίας. έξω από τον έλεγχο της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας. Παρακαλώ να τεθεί η πιο πάνω θέση μας στη σύσκεψή σας για ευρύτερη ενημέρωση και ως μια δεύτερη άποψη επί του θέματος που συζητάτε. Με εκτίμηση για το Σωματείο, Ιωάννης Σεκέρσαβας, Γραμματέας.
Είμαι Παντελής Τιμοσθένος από την Αγία Ειρήνη Κυρηνίας. I believe it's to the benefit of the Cyprus Republic to grant the right of the vote to the refugees of diaspora. London today, we are the largest city of diaspora citizens. Issos, the largest city of Cyprus, where we have the Cypriot population. If we had to have to count to see how many we have, London will come the largest city, larger than Nicosia, than Limassol, than any other city in Cyprus. Our Archdiocese of Thyatira in Great Britain has 119 communities over England. In London alone, we have 34 churches. Most of people, they came after 1974, as they were displaced from their houses. Today, the Republic of Cyprus must give the right to the refugees of diaspora to vote. It's to the benefit of our country to do that, as all the Greek Cypriots and all the refugees here, they always have helped Cyprus. And the big, as we said it, in 1974, that we stood on our feet and we managed to carry on and be here today where we are, it was due to the refugees and to the Greek Cypriots in London and in diaspora.
Hi, my name is Maria Pitrakou. I'm originally from Rizogafkazo. I'm speaking in English. I apologize, although I do think in Greek, so if I stutter, please forgive me. My question is number one, there are Cypriots that left Cyprus before 1974. Is this not going to cover these people also? The second question is, what are the next steps? So, what needs to be done in order for Lobby's voice to be heard? Who do you need to contact? Like, do you have a specific member of parliament that will actually talk about this and get this change that needs to be done? Thank you.
You mean in Cyprus?
In Cyprus. Obviously, it goes without saying that if you're Cypriot, you're Cypriot. It doesn't matter where you live, you're entitled to vote. I probably would be eligible to vote, but I moved to London 2 years ago and I just realised that I'm not eligible to vote, according to what you're saying. Nevertheless, I'd like to understand what are the next steps.
Thanks. Okay, so in answer to your question, in terms of eligibility, the proposal from Lobby for Cyprus is that it's not only refugees who fled in 74, but it's all Cypriot citizens. And what we're saying is that the requirement for 6 months residency should not be applicable. So it would include those who left before 74 and were here studying or working or whatever. Those who want to restrict it to refugees, I'm not sure what they want or what their limits are. In terms of what can be done, so lobbying within Cyprus is important because at the end of the day it is the Cyprus politicians who need to vote this through. So that's a good start. Signing the petition to the president to show that there is a movement and there is support, and actually the people that have signed the petition to date come from all 4 corners of the world, from Australia, from America, from Africa, from London. So that would be another thing. If I can ask Theo to just outline what we have done so far in terms of approaches internally in Cyprus and take it from there.
I think that important factors is, as one of the members here said, is what are the next steps. And as we hear from the lawyers, obviously they're setting down the legal aspect of how we can go about it. But the most important thing is the refugees, the refugee associations, and those who are citizens here in the diaspora. Do we want to pressurize our government in order to give us the right to vote? Yes or no? Yes. If that is the case, then we have to take action. And the action we have to take is to put tremendous pressure on the political parties, and I will put the blame a lot on political parties here in the diaspora who have not united our diaspora. No, they have not. And the Federation has a responsibility for that as well, because they're governed by these political parties. We've seen in the elections, we've seen in the recent elections on Sunday, which were held here, and I have heard through the grapevine that 10% of those that went to vote, 10% had eligibility. The others got it through the Barathiragi and had the right to vote. Why should they have the right to vote when these refugees don't, or I don't? That is where we have to start from. And that is why we have to realize that we have the rule of law, and we have the rights to do that. This is something that everybody has to be responsible for. Andreas represents a political party in Cyprus. I respect Andreas. I've known him since I came here to the UK. He has foundations. He has a right to tell the President of Cyprus exactly what we feel here today. Right? Those who are refugees and non-refugees, you have to do that. And you have to demand from them. I know your views, Andreas, and you should mention them, that you're against it. Why don't you mention why you're against it, so everybody can know, and whether that is true what you're saying, so we understand why our government doesn't want us to have the right to vote. Let us be clear. Let us be transparent. We are all human beings. We're all citizens. I've got my tafkotida. I have the right, but I will not allow any political party in London to dictate and come to me and tell me, sign here so you can have the right to vote. No, I will not do that. I will only vote when I have the right to vote and my government gives it to me. I respect the Republic of Cyprus. The President and the rest are citizens of the Republic of Cyprus, as I am. And that is how the British citizens have the respect for their people. That is where we have to start as well. Thank you.
First of all, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. The only reason I'm leading a political party, this Democraticos Συνδέσμος, is because there is a Cyprus problem. That's absolutely clear. I'm not a refugee, but I would say 95% of my family are actually refugees. They are from Morphou, Sula would know the family. I lived in Morphou. I finished school, grammar school in Morphou. From Bodamos, Campu, Zodia. 95% of my relatives are actually from the occupied area. I'm involved with the Cyprus issue from day one, when I got on the plane on the 20th of July to go to Cyprus, through Italy, Greece, and then we ended up in Cyprus on the 2nd of August. So I've been involved from day one, and I will never rest until we see a solution to the problem.
What about us?
Yes, I will come to that. I will come to that. I would say another thing as well. The solution of the problem is not just a refugee's problem, it's everybody's problem. We all care about the solution, whether we are refugees or not, because it will affect everybody in Cyprus, including the refugees, including the ones who are in the free area. So it's not just the refugees problem. Don't make it into that context, because you're losing the argument. At the beginning, I heard all these views of refugees having the eligibility to vote on referendum, because I totally disagree on people having the right to vote on national elections if they have not been fulfilling the obligation, the fact that you have to live in Cyprus at least for 6 months. And because there is no way of revoking that right, even if you leave, you are still.
Can we let him speak?
The rules are very simple.
If we let him speak, and then you can speak after.
If you can prove, if you go to the Ministry of Interior and you can prove that in the last 6 months you live permanently in Cyprus, they will give you the right to vote, they will give you the εκλογικό βιβλιάριο, and if you come back to the UK, you have no problem. I was on Sunday at the elections for Parliament at the community centre. And I tell you something, I mean, yes, quite rightly you mentioned numbers. 10% they had right to vote, like Cyrus, like some people who've been temporarily in Cyprus or came later on. But when you see these people, okay, who come there who have no connection with Cyprus, some of them, they're 80, 85 years old. And if you look at the ID numbers on the electoral register, they have numbers over 1 million, which is our youngsters' numbers nowadays. And if you're Andreas Papavridis, you've been fighting for Cyprus all your life, how would you feel when you don't have the right to vote on the national election? I don't want the right, and I never actually applied for it. But when I see these people who have no connection with it, I've seen a girl there, she was only 23, she couldn't even speak a word of Greek, and she was asking if somebody can show her how to vote. And I asked her, how did you get the right to vote? And the mother answered, yeah, but she speaks Greek. I said, excuse me, but somebody has to draw the line. They come from a political party. I will not name it, but obviously, you know, if you look at the results. But that's not ethical. For somebody to abuse the system during a certain period being in government, to give these people the right to vote. But I'll come back to the refugees. Theodora mentioned earlier on something which is dangerous land. Don't mention people who went abroad before 1974. Probably most of this will not be alive anyway, because we are talking about many years, 40 years. But people who are actually refugees, moved because of the invasion in 1974, I feel passionate about it because you lost your home. You are forced to be here. Okay. But if you take the people who've been abroad before 1974, you're on dangerous ground. And that would not serve any purpose or anything. To actually put you into perspective, I'm not just leading a party, I'm also the chairman of the World Federation of Cyprus. And in previous meetings, at the conferences, even the last one, we have voted, all of us, unanimously, that we are asking for the right of vote to be given, not just the refugees, but even the people who came from other areas, like myself, like some other people, who, and to be honest with you, to actually feel that this is right, it has to be the people who care about this country, not just everybody. Who some political parties, they may go and find them just to have them. They will not do it probably during the referendum. And I hope we come to that situation to have a referendum. But the fact that they actually go and find them and bring them and give them the right to vote on national elections, this is unbelievable, unbelievable. So just to sum up, I'm not against of what Theodore said. I find it difficult, to be honest with you. I find it very difficult that it will be achieved, but it has to be very selective, not just a right to everybody. And refugees, yes, but people who care about this country and work for this country, exception, they should be given the right to vote. That's what I wanted to say, basically. Obviously, there will be arguments afterwards, and I'm willing to answer them. I have no problem with that. Thank you.
I'll respond. It's interesting that you talk about those people who left before 1974 and why should they be entitled to vote. I mean, this campaign wasn't started by 2 individuals or 3 individuals. The idea came from a few individuals. But like I said, we've done research, I've consulted experts here in the UK and back in Cyprus on the law. We also did mini surveys. So we took the people who do show an interest in Cyprus. So for example, people who attend Lobby for Cyprus meetings, and we asked them to set out their criteria. So to define themselves. When did they leave Cyprus? Where do they come from? Where's their family? Do they hold citizenship? And it's interesting that actually quite a few of them left before 74. So there's someone from the Famagusta Association who had already left Famagusta before 74, because as we know, before 74 people were leaving for economic reasons, to build a better life, in order to send money back to their families. So I don't share your view that those who left before 74 should be excluded, because they had their reasons for leaving. It doesn't make them any less of a Cypriot because they left before 74. In terms of picking and choosing who has the right to vote, I'm afraid that's not democracy, and we can't select who we give the right to vote based on what we think they're going to vote. So I will only give you the vote because I know you're going to vote for this way or that way. We can't be arbitrary in the way we determine criteria. That's not democracy, that's not the rule of law. We need to set the criteria, and the criteria will apply to everyone. And unfortunately, that may mean that people who don't care about Cyprus or people who have ulterior motives will get the right to vote. But at the end of the day, Lobby for Cyprus is not saying that we will get you the right to vote in order to vote one way or the other. I mean, Lobby for Cyprus has made it clear that we do not support a bizonal bicommunal federation. We see as nothing less than apartheid and segregation through statute. But that doesn't mean that if we succeed in this campaign, we will make everyone in the diaspora vote against the bizonal bicommunal federation. We can't. We don't determine what people vote. It is up to every individual to have their opinion, their freedom of opinion to vote in whichever way they want. It's up to us to educate the citizens who have the right to vote, to explain to them what they're voting for, and that's as far as we can go. So we can't select people just because they'll vote one way or the other. But I know you don't. I know, Theo, I got a bit worked up, but I know you don't object to this. Like you said, POMAC at global level has voted for a resolution that would like to see the vote extended to refugees, and where we differ is that we want the right to be...
That doesn't include the children, let's put it this way, of refugees.
Okay.
That will make it totally impossible.
But then you kind of contradict yourself, because then you also said that those people who, like yourself, are not a refugee, have spent their entire life campaigning for Cyprus, should have the right to vote because they care about Cyprus. So, I mean, that's why we want to be inclusive, and the reason why we've established this criteria is because of research that we've done, both at the community level but also in the professional level. And that's what I have to say, but I think Johan wants to say something.
If I may, thank you, Marcus. I would like to ask the Consul General to please convey to the President of the Republic of Cyprus what we have mentioned here tonight, that we would like to meet with the President, a representation from Lobby for Cyprus and the refugee associations at his convenience. Thank you.
I have listened to everybody, and my conclusion is that my decision before I came here still stands. And I agree with Adoulo Tigerinia, the letter I read to you, and partly with my friend here. The right for the refugees to vote is very legitimate, and the refugees who left in 74, they should be given the right to vote for what happens to their property they left behind. They have the right. They should be given the right. But beyond that, I disagree for a vote for everybody in the diaspora. First of all, this is unrealistic. It will never be able for the government to compile a list of all the Greek Cypriot refugees abroad. We have 300,000 or so in England. We have others in America, in Australia, in South Africa, and everywhere around the world. How can you compile a list that everybody can vote? I mean, you cannot selectively find very big, for instance, 20,000, 30,000 from London or 10,000 from Australia, and that's it. No, if you are going to give a vote for the people of diaspora, you should give it to everybody, and that I believe is unrealistic. Secondly, we are not talking about a country, a normal situation. We are the next referendum will be for the solution of Cyprus. And that involves primarily the bizonal, bicommunal federation solution. Lobby, as Theodora said, and as Nick said, started with the motto against the bizonal, bicommunal federation. Now, to invite everybody beyond the refugees to vote, that I believe defeats the purpose. But to give the right to the refugees, I support it wholeheartedly, and that's why we voted for the petition, but not for the whole of the diaspora. Thank you.
Εγώ πρέπει να πω ότι χαίρομαι γιατί συμφωνήσαμε σε ένα πράγμα. Ότι οι πρόσφυγες που έφυγαν από την Κύπρο το 1974, ασυζητητοί, πρέπει να έχουν το δικαίωμα να ψηφίσουν. Τούτο να θεωρηθεί ότι όλοι συμφωνούν γι' αυτό. Και πολύ περισσότερο εγώ απέφυγα να πούμε άλλα πράγματα, γιατί δεν θέλω να θεωρηθεί προσωπικό, αλλά άνθρωποι που πολέμησαν το 1974, άνθρωποι που θυσίασαν δικούς τους, θυσιάστηκαν ήδη και οι δικοί τους, έχουν το δικαίωμα. Γιατί είπα όμως ότι πρέπει να σκεφτούμε και λίγο τους που είναι πρόσφυγες. Εγώ είμαι πρόσφυγας. Διότι μαζί μου πολέμησαν και άνθρωποι που δεν ήταν πρόσφυγες, διότι ήταν στρατευμένοι. Και πολλοί από τους, όπως εγώ, είναι στο εξωτερικό. Και έχασαν και δικούς τους. Τώρα, η μεγάλη ιστορία είναι πώς θα τους εντοπίσεις, όπως είπαμε, αυτούς που ενδιαφέρονται για το Κυπριακό, για την Κύπρο γενικά, γιατί είναι και κάποιοι που δεν ενδιαφέρονται. Και εδώ είναι πρόβλημα. Τουλάχιστον όμως, το πρώτο σκέλος που αφορά τους πρόσφυγες που έφυγαν το 1974 γιατί εκδιώχθηκαν από τους Τούρκους, και δεν έχει σημασία αν κατοικήσαν στη Λεμεσό ή στην Πάφο ή στο Ντουμπάι που έκανα 10 χρόνια ή στο Λονδίνο ή στην Βελγούρδη. Αυτό τουλάχιστον το μήνυμα πρέπει να περάσει χωρίς καμία αντίρρηση. Από εκεί και πέρα αντιλαμβάνομαι τις δυσκολίες και ξέρω ότι είναι αρκετά δύσκολο να εντοπιστούν οι άνθρωποι, οι υπόλοιποι που όντως ενδιαφέρονται, αλλά αυτό ας το αφήσουμε και στις αρχές και στις επιδιώξεις της δικές μας, να δούμε αν βρεθεί τρόπος. Ευχαριστώ.
I'd like to just welcome everybody on behalf of Lobby for Cyprus. It's a seminar that we always have on a yearly basis, and hopefully this one will be a very interesting one. I'm not going to go into too much detail because the chair will take over from me. I just want to make a very short statement for one of the members of Parliament who apologizes for not being here tonight, David Burrows. Before I do that, I'd like to just welcome, on behalf of the Cyprus High Commission, the Consul General, Mr. Ioannis Koupouladidis. His High Commissioner apologizes as he's in Parliament at a very important seminar. Welcome to everybody. David Burrows asked me to read out a statement before we start the seminar. I support the campaign to provide a right for Cypriot refugees to vote in the referendum on a settlement to the Cyprus problem. If Cyprus had just been occupied and divided, it would plainly be unjust to deny recent refugees a right to vote in the referendum. It would be a denial of their right to determine the future of their country, the future of their human rights, and the future of their property. Over 40 years on the right of the refugees to vote in a referendum is equally valid and relevant. Refugees should not be disadvantaged by the passage of time to find a solution to the Cyprus problem. Every day that goes by without a just solution adds to the injustice for the refugees. It would therefore be wrong to time refugees out of a right to vote in the referendum. I will work with Cypriots, both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriots, to support their right to vote and have their views heard and counted in the referendum. David Barrows, Member of Parliament. Finally, I just want to make just one slight comment. I'm not sure if everybody saw or heard of Alexis Tsipras and the meeting he had with Erdogan. I was going to take my tie off. Some of you may have heard about it, but it was quite interesting. When they met in Turkey, Erdogan had a bit of a chit-chat with Mr. Tsipras, and then he asked him the question, Gravata, tie. Why are you not wearing a tie? And he said, well, I will, maybe next time I will. He then thought a few seconds and said, I will wear a tie when there's a Cyprus solution and when we return to Cyprus. And that was the statement as Alexis Tsipras. Very profound. I think we should all go away, never wear a tie again, until we resolve the Cyprus issue. Thank you. Over to you, Marcos.
Discussion about what is, after all, a very important subject area. It's important politically, legally, and morally. And yes, morally too. All too often, politicians in this country and in other countries in the world, they overlook the moral side to discussions. And in the context of Cyprus and a referendum, the moral side is, in my estimation at least, the most important consideration. Before I proceed, I'd like to say thank you to the Lobby for Cyprus, which of course is spearheaded by Theodora, for having organised tonight. The Lobby for Cyprus campaigns tirelessly and selflessly for the reunification of Cyprus and for a just solution to the ongoing occupation of the north of the island. The lobby's efforts and achievements are commendable, and they are true Cypriot patriots. I would also like to thank the Hellenic Centre for having provided this wonderful evening for tonight's seminar. Now, tonight's seminar is of course entitled The Right to Vote in Referenda. For the last few years in Britain, referendum has been a buzzword for politicians, journalists and members of the public alike. I am of course alluding to the Scottish referendum and the forthcoming EU referendum. However, referendums have also featured prominently abroad, such as the South Sudan referendum and the Crimea referendum. Naturally, however, we're all gathered here tonight to discuss referendums in the context of our beloved island, Cyprus, and specifically how the future of Cyprus can be shaped and shaped with justice. At the heart of tonight's discussion will be whether the refugees, who were made refugees by Turkey's invasion of Cyprus in 1974, together with Cypriots living abroad who are also victims of the Turkish invasion, whether they should have the right to vote in a referendum concerning a solution to the ongoing Turkish occupation of the north of Cyprus. Tonight we have a distinguished panel who will examine both the right to vote in a referendum for refugees and Cypriots living outside of Cyprus. We have Dr. Theodora Χρίστου, we have Nick Knoupias, and representing the refugee associations we have Dr. Βασίλης Μαύρου of the Famagusta Association. We have Angelos Bishonges of the Ios and Vosios Association. We have Sula Kitsu of the Morfu Association. We have Sávvas Pαυλίδης of the Lapithos-Karabas Association. And we have Nick Yanulu of the Komi Association. The structure of tonight's seminar will be as follows. The members of the panel will speak individually for 20 minutes. They will then be followed by representatives from the UK-based Cypriot refugee associations who will talk about why their respective associations support the right to vote. And finally, there will be a question and answer session for about 20 minutes in which members of the audience can ask questions to both the panel members and the representatives of the refugee associations. This is going to be a very important and informative discussion tonight, and so I ask people now to ensure that mobile phones are either turned off or switched to silence.